So we have these input fields on us here. Right here, because we have that one dominion that has dominion belongs to and member and interest, right? Because of that code we have, those two lines we have there, Grails gives us this link here to add an interest object. So we bring up that, brings up the create view for the interest object. And we'll save that. And go back to number. Now you see here when we're on the interest object, the member's name is showing up nicely because we have a toString for member that does that. I didn't put a toString on the interest just to show you what the default behavior is. If you know what toString, the domain class will show up as a class name, fully qualified class name, colon, and an ID number. So if you want to use a toString, basically always. So that's the edit view. If you want to create a new member, that. The create view. So we can do a new member here. Now, if I don't put a proper email address here, we'll show the validation at work. It tries to save that, and it can't save it. It fails that email constraint validation that we had on there. And then when it fails the validation constraint, it gives you an error message like this. Now, this error message is in an IETing folder under the messages.properties file, so you can modify these things, customize your error messages and whatnot. If we fix this, then. Now, it's not checking that it's actually a real email address or anything, it's just checking for the structure. Something at something dot something. Okay, so that's, the rest of them are very similar. One thing we show is the speaker. If you look at the speaker, and we edit that, we'll see that we get a text area for the vial, because the max size 5,000 we put in. Everything else is just input fields, but this one's a text area because it knows it's a bigger size. So the code that we're seeing here is now in our controllers directory. So that's a package directory for juggler, and we have 4 controllers. So the member controller, they all have the same actions in them. There's 6 actions, I believe. Well, 7 if you count as index. Index is the default one, and it redirects to list. That's why list is what comes up when we click on those links. So the list just grabs a list of data using that list method that we saw earlier. It passes in the params. Params is available in every controller action, and this is just a map, a hash map containing all the request parameters. It's setting this max up here because the list is adding that max value to the params max, and that's max and offset are used for pagination. So this just gives it a max. If you set one, it'll use it, otherwise it'll use the default of 10. If you set something bigger than 100, it'll shrink it down to 100. There's no extras up there. And the count is also required by pagination. So it gives you that as a member.count. And count, again, is a method that was added to our object. You didn't have to write code for the count method, so there are all regular classes. Okay. Create. One thing I want to point out here to the list is we don't tell what view to go to at all. Right? The last thing we do is we return this map. This here is a map literal in Ruby. It's just the square brackets and then key value pair separated by commas. That's a Java util hash map. And it's being returned because it's the last date, but we could put that in and return it explicitly, we don't need to. So, if you return a map as the last step of your action, then what Grails will do is it will look for a view called list. And if you come down here to our views directory, you'll see that we have directories for each of the controllers. So when we come to the member directory, it has this list.gsp. See right there. Okay, so that's the convention that Grails uses. And it does this with the default predicate that it builds for us, but we can also take advantage of this for our own things. So we can create new actions and create views to go with them, and we don't have to ever worry about telling it which view to go to explicitly. There's easy ways to tell which view to go to if you need to. We'll see those in a minute, but you don't have to if you follow the conventions. So the create is the same thing. The create will render the create view once you're done. And what create does, it creates a new member and it assigns the params to the properties of that instance. Properties is another method that's been added to our domain classes. And properties is a method that does binding for us. It takes in a map of values, it reads through that map, and it finds any keys in that map that associate or relate to properties in our object, and it writes a value to them. The param values are all going to be strings because they're coming in from HTTP. So it will do all the conversion if necessary for us too, for all your basic data types. that's setting the parameter, the members of subproperties equals parameters. We're doing that here on the create, even though when we first bring up create, there's nothing there at all. So the parameter was empty, so that step was unnecessary. But remember when we did that, got an error with the email before? Well, it re-renders the same view here. So then the parameters at that point do have values, the form values you've already entered, so those are passed back in so you don't lose them. Okay, so the last step is it returns that map as a single item in it, and then we're running the create view, which is right down here. We'll look at the views in a minute. The save is the response thing for the create, so if you go back and look at the create view now then. The form here is the action equals save. So it's going to call a save action. We're not telling which controller, because by default it'll always look in the controller that it's already in. So since we're in the member controller for the create view, when you call save, it's going to call controller/save. So back to our controller. The save will just do the same thing with the parameters. And now instead of saying the properties, it passes it in to the constructor. Again, the name variable of the constructor that Groovy provides allows you to pass a map in and it'll route to the appropriate properties. Then we save the instance, this flush::true, which tells Hibernate to go ahead and save it right away. And then, if everything went okay, we redirect to the show. So redirect was called the controller, the member controller's show action, and it sets the ID to member instance ID. Now these values here, controller action ID, are the same values that we see on URL. So if we were to do member/show/1, member is the controller, show is the action, and 1 is the ID. And that brings that one up. And that's up to the URL map, which hopefully we can see if we don't have time. And there's the show action, this uses the get method, which takes a single value for ID. The ID is a long, but again, it's going to come as a string, but it'll handle conversion for us. So if we can find the instance there, then if it can't find the instance, it'll set a message, an error message, and pass it to the list. So we can see that if we try to put in an ID that didn't exist, in this case 42, it can't find us. This is number not found with ID 42, it just sends it back to the list. If it does find it, then it just returns the map. And then that will bring up the show view, which we saw earlier. Edit brings up the edit view that we saw earlier. It works very similar to the create. And an update is a response handler for edit. So if you add something, you say, when you hit the submit, it'll call update. Update will retrieve it first and then set all the values. Finally, it also does some checking for the errors with objects and concurrency stuff. And then delete just deletes. So that's the default actions that we get in a Grails controller. And then we saw some of the views already. Look here, here's the list view. It's a G sortable column. That's the tag that gives us those columns we were clicking on earlier to sort the members. So all these tags here start with a G. These are the default tags that come with Grails. We can create custom tags too, which are really easy to do. Hopefully we're going to see that. And then here's the pagination control we saw down here, the G pagination. And all that style is CSS, and there's a bunch of CSS that comes bundled in, you can obviously change all that. Okay, so that's a brief overview of the controllers and views. The main thing to get out of that is that the convention of controller actions map to views if you have them. Otherwise, if they don't, actually should show it real quick. The two other things you can do, we saw them here earlier, but just to mention it. If you don't want to render the view that's tied to the name, you can render a specific view using the render method. And then just tell it the view you want to show. And then if you're doing that, you want to pass a model to it since you're not returning a model. Right? The other ones, we return a model like that, return a map, and then it finds the view based on the actions, so it'll find the edit with that data. Here we're rendering a specific view, it's edit in this case again, but we're the update action. So we're rendering the edit view explicitly, and we're passing a model, a map of data. So you can render, or you can redirect. In redirect, you can redirect to an action, or you can redirect it to another URL. So redirect will take either a controller action and ID combination, you'll form more of those values, or it'll take a URL. And that's just a standard HTTP redirect. Okay, so that's the controllers and actions, and views. There's a lot more we can show on this, I just want to give you the high-level basics of this part of it. Then we're going to go on to some other things. Let's put Let's open up, there's a file here under the views layouts, called main.gsp. So you notice that on our views, we have the standard look to it, the Grails logo here, and all stuff the same on all of them. So a lot of that's controlled in this main.gsp. This is used by site mesh. What happens actually is this is the page that's rendered every time. Every page we see in our application is really this page with our view pages pulled apart and put into place here. So here it says G layout head. That's going to pull the head section from our page and put it right there. Down here, the G layout body is going to pull the body section from our page and put it there. So this stuff, the rest of the stuff is always going to be there. So if we want to change our title, each page of the title, so we can start out, put a fixed title in here. That. And if we want to change, earlier I copied in another image so we can swap out the Grails image. Okay, so just change a few other things here just in case. Okay, so now with that change there, I think if we refresh this, yep, we see the new thing there. So you can make these changes here. This reflects on all of our pages everywhere. We use the same thing. Now you saw how this is in this views folder here. It's under a special layouts folder, but you can also put controller folders within there. So you can have different layouts for different controllers if you want. I don't want to do that. Okay, so I'll show that one real quick. Now we're going to look at tag lives. One of my favorite things in Grails. So we're going to create a tag lib. We're doing Grails create-tag-lib. Now we didn't have to do this script again. It's all just convention. So it's just a, I'm going to give it a name. Called a tag lib. It's just by convention. The tag library is in the tag libs folder right here. And it ends in the name tag lib, or the word tag lib. So you put that on the end of any class. It's just a plain Java or Ruby class. Nothing special to it at all. It's all by convention because of where it's at. So now a tag is just a closure, a Ruby closure. So you just do def and you give it a name. So it's a name closure. We're going to call one call. Actually, I've just fixed that already. So it's just in this tag lib, we can create as many tags as we wanted to. It's one file can hold as many tags as we wanted. No other files to create, no other classes to extend, nothing else to do. Each closure will be a tag, and the tag will be the name of the closure. A tag can take attributes, it can also take a body. We're not going to use a body in this one, but if you do have a body, you always make sure it's the second argument in your closure. This is Ruby closures have the arguments are declared by comma-separated variables, and then this arrow key here. So everything after this is the body of it. So think of it as the method, this is the body of the method, and here's the arguments that it takes. So we're not going to use a body in this one, just attributes. And attributes is a map, a hash map. So in this, and then the other thing I want to show about tags real quick is that every tag has this implicit variable called out, which represents the output stream of the response. So whatever you write to this out will end up on your page. So that's really all the tag is just a name closure that you write to the out. And that's what's going to be on your page. And you can do anything you want there, write whatever you want out. In this case, we're going to grab a list of meetings. So we have our meeting list variable we declare. This max is going to determine how many we're going to show on our list. And we're going to set a default of 5. Right here, I'm using the Ruby Elvis operator. See how it looks like Elvis kind of sideways. And that's basically a shortcut ternary operator. So it says use the value on the left if it's there. If it's null, then use the value on the right. So if our user passes an account attribute, it'll use it. Otherwise, we'll use 5. The past attribute